portfolio are you actually operating, and are you actually hoping to share the data around your infrastructure with other organisations as well? And I think it has huge potential for us to realise an integrated and resilient infrastructure across the UK, and that's very much, I think, why we're seeing so much interest around the globe, and certainly as Vice Chair now of Building Smart UK, and the summit that we hosted 6 weeks ago for the International Building Smart, was just how much interest is being generated in the desire to develop open standards and embrace the principles of what we've been doing in the UK to enable better management of information. So I think what I've found quite useful, particularly in the training, both at Atkins and ICE as well, is to say, well, if you're uncomfortable about that acronym, think about better information management. But actually, it is quite phenomenal how, as an industry, we get caught up with what an acronym means and debate it and push back on it. We're seeing that now with SMART. To some extent, I think let's just focus on, well, what is the outcome that we want to achieve? Let's go for that, and let's stop using so much of our energy discussing what the acronym actually means. So if we can accept that as a principle of what we're going for here, I think what we see across the industry is that BIM does require cultural change. It is implying, therefore, that there are a lot of stakeholders who are going to be surprised that BIM has such a big attitude, because if you're talking about managing information, that actually touches pretty well everything that you're doing within a project and across management of infrastructure. And people get very defensive about that. They don't like change, they don't like interference, and they need justification. So I think this is very much where I think it's helpful to think around the behavioural change side of things. One of the things I like is thinking about, you know, if we're actually saying that BIM is enabling collaboration and collaborative working, actually a part of that is instilling a team spirit. And what you need to be doing, the paradox of that, is that you need to empower people to feel that they're in control of their destiny and they can control and shape the change themselves. So what I think is quite pertinent here is the quote from Winston Churchill, is that personally I'm always ready to learn, I don't always like being taught. So there's a thing around being able to introduce change in a way which is quite democratic in a sense. And there's a good deal of humility in this, is that, that if you try to tell people what to do, you are going to get that sort of resistance. So the research that I did with the MSc and looking at behavioural change in the collaborative working is that why do we find it so hard to actually instill collaborative working? Why are we finding that people are pushing back on BIM and thinking it not holistically with all of the different disciplines, but with their particular patch? And what I really uncovered that with talking to a range of people across the industry is that we do need to be thinking of this from the position of different players. So how we feel, how we experience this as an individual, as a team, and we may well belong in different teams with loyalties to different teams, to our organisation, and then the system overall. So if you think about a project you may have been, which actually involved not only different disciplines and different teams, but people from different organisations as well, you'll probably have been seeing that actually people had their own language, they were bringing things from their home team that they really wanted to keep because it was a part of their identity. And we can have as much governance and cultural side of things, environment, behaviours, but if we ignore that, we need to look at the dynamic of this right the way through, from individual through to the overall system, we're going to get unstuck. And what underpins this is trust, relationships, appropriate leadership, and actually a respect for diversity as well. And I'll explore that a little bit as we go through the talk. But I think if you could just note at the moment that one of the things that I think people are noticing, and what came out very strongly in the research, is that if you don't get alignment across the whole of the system, you are going to get attention and you're going to get unstuck. And I think this is a part of, you know, how we can ensure that we are able to roll out open standards, how we're able to roll out level 2 BIM without people saying, well, I want to use my version of level 2. So getting clarity of what level 2 is and what the wrapper is one of the big priorities now for the UK BIM task group, and something that will be becoming apparent over the next couple of months. The other piece to this is motivation. So if you don't get individuals and teams actually motivated to get behind this, again, the change does break apart. And certainly I see this with the rollout of BIM as well. If you can't actually get everybody believing and being quite passionate in, this is going to make a difference for me as an individual, for my team and my organisation, then you just don't get that momentum that you so badly need. So what I'm going to use, there's quite a few different ways of looking at change, and you may have heard of COTA's 8 steps. One that I quite like using is Future, Engage, Deliver. You can certainly go on the internet and explore that. But I guess what I'm really saying is work with what your team, your organisation feels comfortable with, rather than imposing a particular model yourself. So find out who your change leaders are and work with them to make sure that they can really help you embed the change programme. But what I will do is I'm structuring this particular talk around the COTA's 8 steps. I will refer to Future, Engage, Deliver as we go through as well, because I think it does give some clarity that there's just 3 things you need to remember. But if we go for the first step of COTA, which is the creating a sense of urgency, a hunger to change, why should we be doing it? I think what has been done, and hopefully we may want to discuss this towards the end of the talk, but within the UK, I think the communication which has been put out, and David Philp is very much a mastermind of, is actually with a big gain for UK infrastructure is looking at the business outcomes. It's not just that design construct, it's the whole life management of our infrastructure and the way that we integrate, which is hugely important. That's what we should have firm sights of. So you've all seen the level 2 BIM diagram. I would imagine that Mervyn talked about that at the first webinar. There is a progression. There is the vision of Digital Built Britain, which I think is an amazingly powerful one. And it does mean that as an industry, as a construction industry, infrastructure industry, we do need to open our doors to other industries. From the IT side of things, we need the semantic web, we need the open standards coming through from W3C. So again, we are on a journey. And there is a destination of April 2016. It continues beyond that. We need to make sure we get the relationships that are strong enough to allow us to do that. So the momentum has been gathering. We've had very firm steerage from the government. That's been really good. But if I can then bring the parallel then of what we've been doing within Atkins, is we've really made sure that the leadership at the top are aware of why we should be doing this, why it's urgent, and making sure that they communicate on that. So whether it be at the UK level or at the global level, being quite sure that we have a clear message coming from the top that this is important, there is buy-in, we want that investment, we want everybody to lean into it. The interesting thing is here is that it is, I think, easier to do this sort of thing for a smaller team, for a smaller company. Once you're over that critical number of around 50, you're having to work much harder, I think, in developing that common language and that sense of urgency coming from the top. What we did at Atkins, and this I would acknowledge from John Roberts, who's now working at Lang O'Rourke, is to actually say, well, what is it going to look like at 2016? What do we need to see? And John was very able to clearly express, well, we need our engineers to understand data. it is about data, it's not just about drawings and documents. We need them to be able to engage in a collaborative 3D virtual environment. But we also need them to hang on to, you know, design management, how they continue to do that within that new way of working. And the urgency bit was to say, oh, and by the way, guys, that's entry level. So if you just think that's enough, think again. What we then need to do, so we're getting much of a picture of why, that sense of urgency. Building a coalition, because you can't do this on your own, is really, really important. You can't be expecting it all to come from the top, neither can you of the grassroots itself. So this has parallels, this particular diagram, with what the UK BIM Task Group did, but this comes from Atkins, is that with the blessing of our group SLT, or group executive, as other organisations would refer to it, we were able to build up a strategy team across all of the regions, our businesses and disciplines, who could then drive energy and direction through to the technical transition teams. But there's a two-way dialogue going on, which is really, really important. In fact, looking at the diagram, it's flawed, isn't it? Because I've only shown it in one direction. Again, just thinking about, is the relationship strong enough to get the job done? How are you going to be able to sustain it? Are the relationships diverse enough? Is there trust there? How can you actually support that relationship with better trust? And is the leadership actually strong enough to do that? So I think then being able to share the change vision is really important. So involving all of those people in building a change vision so that they feel that they have that ownership that I was referring to earlier. And one of the examples I love and felt very privileged to be a part of, and Andrew Cowell has been leading on this, is 820 with Thames Water. So developing as a team what the picture looked like, and as an industry, with the water industry, as across much of our infrastructure industry, traditionally having that design and then hiccuping into construction, and even more of a hiccup into operate, that kind of doesn't feel good enough. And we've been used to the client not quite knowing what he wants, and to be blunt, that actually that's where the value engineering and the making money has happened, and people get out quickly, and well, whatever happens at operations isn't my problem. And being able to communicate actually that that simply isn't good enough, and it doesn't need to happen. Actually, we can create a virtual asset where we can be experimenting, playing with different scenarios of what would happen both during construction but then into operation and maintenance. And what are the opportunities for introducing efficiencies and longer term gain for that business outcome? How can we improve the customer experience? And I think that then helps people to really understand this is worth it. I am going to have to change. I may have to change the way I feel I deliver my job, but I can understand what the gain is, what the outcome is going to be. So very, very powerful, I think, to make sure that you build that coalition, but you share the creation of the change vision with them. And another great example, I think, is Crossrail, where again, I think many people will have seen this at the BIM conferences. This is really focusing on, we're talking about making our assets intelligent and integrating right the way through, and to make sure that data can be reused many times. And that's a great vision to be able to give both publicly but across the multiple organisations who are involved in delivering on Crossrail. So looking again at the practicalities of how you do that, as Atkins, as I said earlier, what I was adopting was future engaged delivery, because those three things, it's quite easy for people to grasp. Yes, okay, future, we need to be very clear what that is, how we're going to communicate. We need to be sure that we're engaging right the way across our organisation, and we need to be determined on our delivery and be sustained in our delivery. And I think what I'd like you to take from this diagram is that that engagement needs to go right the way through, the organisation and through all of the different functions. So don't neglect procurement, don't neglect commercial, legal, don't neglect human resources. This actually touches everyone within the organisation, and you need to make sure that they engage and understand what you're trying to achieve to really be able to sustain that. So common framework for Atkins was that we did start simple, and it has built and it has iterated, and I think that's one of the other things to remember, is that as you move through, you are going to have to shift things to adapt. As you move forward, you get more stakeholders involved. Maybe their attention gets distracted onto other things. So you'll need to change the messaging and the priorities to make sure that you get that momentum still. But for us as Atkins, I think we really felt we needed to get our house in order to really establish what was going on. Then as we gained that momentum, we wanted to share that with our clients and supply chain to bring everybody along the journey with us and to learn from them as well. To be able to celebrate success and benefit from lessons learned would really help then to drive that collaborative working and that buy-in and passion to really want this. And the ultimate gain for Atkins is an energy and a passion to be able to deliver excellently whatever our projects. So getting a common framework and a common language, really, really important. But to remember that actually, you know, this isn't just about technology or just about data. You need to be thinking about your people, your technology, your information. And there's a strategy piece around this also. So we did and keep looking at, well, what's the gap here? So you can see, again, we've divided that into the policy, the people, the technology, the process. And this is an early diagram, but it was really useful to be able to share that, to discuss that with the different stakeholders and make sure that everybody felt that their view had been taken into account. So that was a really useful exercise to do, and that really helped inform the more detailed program as we went through. But one of the things I do think is hugely important is the area of leadership. So engaging and then empowering the team leadership, because this will not be achieved if you've just got one or two BIM champions. It has to be lived right the way through the organisation. So our implementation program within Atkins has started with the Global Strategy Group, who meet regularly, both face-to-face, but also virtually through what we use, Link. But then for each of the regions, we have a program team, a steering group, a corporate BIM team, which essentially represents all of the different functions, and then the businesses, the divisions. So making sure that we have a network which is actually working both from top down and bottom up as well. Communication, making sure those relationships are strong enough and that we're keeping them alive and that the right conversations are happening is hugely important. And in a sense, it comes back to what we're trying to do with BIM, is that actually data underpins trust. If you can rely on data, if you can get the appropriate data through the team, through the organisation, then you get trust. And there's a great book by Covey called The Speed of Trust, which again really helps you on being able to realise an effective change management programme. So having a consistency across your organisation, however simple or complex that is I think really important. And having people who people can identify with, they can see that they are actually living the experience as well, both the ups and the downs and the pain, and being realistic and pragmatic, again, I think is important. So showing your vulnerabilities, showing when you're actually getting quite frustrated and you need help is a really important part of this. And I think one of the enlightening things for me has been that across the regions and across the different levels, we've been able to do that, both within Atkins, as this diagram is showing, but within the UK BIM task group, is that you have to be prepared to take the knocks, that change is tough. You will find times where you think you're hitting a brick wall, but if you can be determined and knuckle in, lean into it, and share some of those difficulties, then you can get through. And again, it's just that belief is what's the final outcome, that it really is worth going through some of that pain. So, yeah, leadership and the energy to empower individuals. We've not been terribly good as an industry. You know, we've tended to build up leaders as a powerful image, but actually having a servant leadership, having team leadership is hugely important. So, you know, we can inspire people, but then it's actually empowering others to be able to take the dream on and own it as well. So, and I think that's one of the things I'd like to share, is that early on in this journey, BIM was my baby within Atkins, and actually one of the things I found most tough was to actually let go. And if I hadn't let go, we wouldn't be as far on this journey as we certainly are now. I'd certainly want to acknowledge Pam Linton, who's our program manager, who's really got things going in the UK and is helping now globally with Donna Huey. And if we hadn't been able to start really working together and to let go and let others do things for us, it simply wouldn't have got the momentum that we now have. So I think that's a really important thing to do, and certainly for me it was quite a humbling experience to go through. So having a communication cascade, I think, is a part of that. So being able to listen to how people are receiving your message, understanding that actually you may have overcomplicated it or you're using terms that just don't land with them, I think is really, really important. And again, our Marcoms people have been fantastic, and we've had many, many sessions where we've sat around different technical disciplines, trying to thrash out, well, what the messaging is, but being able to establish a common language that is that everybody can receive is a really valuable thing to do. And so they have developed various very easy things to recognize, to represent our journey. 5 key points you'll see here, which people can have on a little business card, but it's essentially translated so that it works for a project team, it works for a project manager, it'll work for a commercial manager, so they know within their particular role what that means for them. So having targeted training and webinars which cascade out of this common language is well worth the effort. And we did find, and there's been some funny times when I've been delivering on the ICE training, when I've been talking about BIM execution plans and roles and responsibilities, and I actually got a message come up on the screen, and it was from my husband, who also happens to work at Atkins, saying, what on earth are all these different roles and things? They don't mean anything to us within our business management system. And it was both very funny at the time, but very, very, very insightful for the people I was training as well, is that if you can't convert what's happening around 1192 and the level 2 for your organization to understand, then you're going to get seriously stuck. You have to be able to translate that so it's something that's easily recognizable to them. So we've certainly worked really hard on being able to say, this is what's required for a level 2 1192 perspective, and this is what it's going to look like for you as you move through. So removing those barriers, those urban myths, and making the unfamiliar familiar is really, really important. So we have been really pushing on building information modeling, better information management, talking about it as a methodology, not a technology or an application, really driving around its collaborative working enabled through multi-dimensional awareness of interrelationships. Making people understand that depending on where you sit within that whole life cycle of a project, or even as a discipline, BIM may seem to be of a particular flavour to you. There are 57 flavours of BIM, So, you know, what does it mean for government? What does it mean for clients, for constructors and building users? So, as I was starting to say just a little earlier, listening to how people are actually receiving what you're saying to them and then adapting the language so that it lands better for them, I think is a really important trick with BIM. We do have a common language. There is level 2 as a wrapper. I'm not saying that that isn't right, but being able to convert that messaging appropriately, I think, is something that we can certainly work on harder. So the overall principles with the 820 slide that I showed you earlier, which is to re-chip the workforce, to get them to understand we're not talking about documents and drawings now, we are talking about data and information, hugely important, how we can publish information. So it's really this liberation of the data, and these are this slide that Phil Jackson has created, and I think is really great. And one of the things that has been very useful at Atkins was getting a group of people to work through what our understanding of our current digital plan of work is. And that exercise really helped people to understand that we are talking about digital data. We are moving from drawings and documents to what is the digital data, which informs the decisions that we have to make as we go through a project. So setting those sorts of exercises, again, I think is a really useful tool for helping to implement BIM. One of the things we've also gone through is to figure out, well, what are the things we want to see in a project? What does it give for our clients? And these 10 pointers that you see on this slide here, are things that we can really use to measure the success of our projects in implementing BIM. But we also use it for communicating and being able to discuss what the success points of different projects are for different clients. Excuse me a moment, let's just see what's happened there. One of the things I think is really hard, so yeah, if we're thinking about we're removing barriers here, is that people want to do it their own way. And I think having a bit of a sense of humour about this is quite useful. The BIM bare bust side of things is, you know, having that strategy coming from the top, hugely important. Saying we're going to lean into this, it is going to take time, but determined that you are going to see this on the ground. So we have developed a corporate standard for managing information. It's taken, what, 4 years really to be able to get that to land on the ground. We did start with specifically for a standard for Revit. We then developed one for CAD, and we essentially merged them. But one of the things which is a little bit of the behavioural change piece is we didn't call it information management, which is a very static term. We called it managing information. So make it active so people think, oh, okay, all right, we are going to need to engage in this, and it affects all of our projects across this group. And again, driving home that unfamiliar can be made to be familiar. What we found quite useful was the spot the difference thing. So before BIM, what did your job look like? So actually there was a need, there was execution, delivery, work stage. Well, with BIM, does it really look much different? And I would imagine that if you listen to Mervyn Richards' webinar, he would be very much saying the same thing, is that actually managing our information better is something that has been happening for many years. It's just we've been able to coalesce this around what we now know as level 2. And this sort of exercise, again, allows project teams and my husband to really start to understand how to convert this so that they can be realizing it on the ground for real. We've embedded this within our what we call our business management system. We've worked across our QSE teams, our commercial teams, to ensure that it's going to land right, that it doesn't conflict with the things that they're doing. So you can imagine for an organisation of 18,000 people, that's not a trivial job at all. So it's with some envy that I look at smaller companies where you wouldn't have to do this, so much of this activity right the way across. But it's certainly these different elements, I think, are still common to what you need to do if you're a 10-man organisation, a 50, 200, or the size of some of our amalgamated companies now. Short-term wins, though, because you probably were, what, half an hour into this talk, you might be starting to think, oh my goodness, this all sounds like hard work to me. And that's what you will see during the change programme, and being very aware of how people are feeding back to you. And they're going to get tired, and they need to see progress. So being able to celebrate your successes, your short-term wins, really, really important. So I think this is where, you know, again, with the UK BIM task group as well, and the messaging there is looking at whether there have been successes, not necessarily in, oh, this is a total level 2 project, but these are elements of level 2 which are really important that we need to build on. And this is the sort of thing that we're doing at Atkins. This is the Liverpool wastewater treatment work, which won an award with the Autodesk BIM in Infrastructure in 2013. But you'll notice the symbols on the left there is that, again, this is developing that common language. The piggy bank, not surprisingly, reflects cost savings, so that people are really starting to understand what to look for and what the key features of a project are. Again, showing the different images on the M4, the elevated flyover there. It was entered for awards. We've been able to push that onto the intranet and really get people talking and discussing it. And what we've just recently done actually is have an innovation awards where we had, I think, 35 projects entered, and we actually got all the employees to vote for their favourite project. We then had 5 shortlisted projects, which 4 of us judged and shortlisted to celebrate and really be able to talk about. So it's really sharing that lessons learned, what are the successes, what there is to look out for, and showing that BIM is actually impacting jobs right the way across our businesses, not just buildings, it is for infrastructure as well. So getting that message across. So sustaining that momentum and getting acceleration as well, which clearly we're now in May of 2015. We have a mandate for all publicly funded projects to be using level 2 by April 2016 next year. So I think the sense of urgency is really picking up here. But this is where we're really needing to lean into our hardcore delivery. I've talked about that future, I've talked about that engagement, but you know, let's look at the hardcore delivery here. You'll forgive me that I've had to blank out the details of our program plan within Atkins, but just to give you a flavour of, you know, it is comprehensive, it's involving a lot of different stakeholders. I wouldn't be able to do this if I didn't have a really effective program manager, and she's got business analysts, and we've got the technical teams through the businesses supporting this as well, with all of the different functions of HR, commercial, legal, QSE supporting. It is a long-term plan, but it also excites people because they can see that actually we're going through level 2, we will transition as appropriate to the digital built Britain vision, and the difference that can make. So we're very clear in reporting on that programme, both to our group exec and our sponsor at group exec level, but across the whole of the stakeholder community. We're very consistent in the messaging about how important it is to follow the standards and what are the key things we're looking for to have evidence that standards are being followed. So if I take you through from the strategy, what the journey is, and then what those steps are. what we've really worked hard at is to say, well, what are the key points to adopt our BIM standards? Now, there are certain things there that I know we need to change, although level of detail in information is the collective for the level of definition. And this is really what I'm referring to, is that we can do this, but we will need to evolve and we will need to shift and adapt as the whole of the industry shares the journey of moving and realising full level 2. But one of the things we found really, really useful was when it was actually our leadership who said, well, we've got the health and safety side of things, and innovation, BIM really underpins this. And what we really want to say is for everybody as individuals to feel empowered to show leadership, and don't walk by if you spot that actually people aren't following that standard or aren't understanding that common language. And it is quite incredible, actually, just seeing over even a year that you can sit in the restaurant or on the floor and start to hear people talking that language. And I'm certainly getting that out in industry with different clients at the ICE, is that people are starting to use, heaven help us, the acronyms of EIR and AIR and OIR, and even if they're not understanding it, it can open up that discussion about, it's not just employers' information requirements and projects. We really do want to understand what are the information requirements for the overall organisation, and how does that then cascade and link to the project information and how that feeds into your assets. So really starting to hear how people's language is adapting and maturing is one thing to watch. And one of the interesting things, I think, is BS 1192 and the WIP shared published archive. People have struggled on this, but I think if you really think about it as a framework that people need to live and experience and be reassured by, it can really help. So literally walking the talk and getting people to come away from their computers and their offices and do workshops and explore, well, what is the dialogue, what is the conversation I need, what's the relationship I need to make sure that I am evolving and creating data which is robust, which is reliable and can be trusted right the way through the whole life. So taking some real responsibility and understanding why roles and responsibilities are important. It does bring it to life. So I'm a real believer in having these workshops and making sure that that then underpins the real embedded learning, which is 70% occurs on the job. So that again is where you want teams to support each other, have common understanding and be able to feel bold enough to catch each other. So don't walk on by if you see a mistake's being made, if somebody's trying to cheat and start sharing information which hasn't yet been appropriately checked, reviewed and authorised. We have a range of training to support that sort of philosophy. And we make sure that it is available online through the intranet, but also is being embedded in our PDRs, as we call them, so our HR processes as well. So when we're being assessed each year and what our objectives are for the year, we're actually embedding training that's appropriate for the different people. So anchoring the change into business as usual. What have we really done? And I think this journey has been quite the way that we've communicated it is a realistic one. It is something that I've shared a few times at conferences as well, is that actually what we said is that we would be proud of achieving level 1 by the end of 2014. So that was rolling out our standards. And as far as I was concerned, that would be level 1, and I'd be really pleased if we achieved that. We're a long way on that journey. We are now moving into being level 2 ready. It's certainly a question of you never stop implementing a standard. You have to continually develop. To get to level 2, what we were really saying is the next piece of the jigsaw is that digital plan of work. So understanding what is the digital data that you should be creating, sharing, managing as you work through a project. And as I said earlier, that was a massive learning and very useful in insightful learning exercise for the people who looked at what that digital plan of work would look like for us and then for our clients. And it's a really useful tool as NBS rolls out its toolkit, is because it opens up a very transparent, open dialogue, communication and negotiation about what it is the client is buying and what the supply chain is developing and is selling. And certainly a year or two ago, I was quite stubborn about saying I didn't want to see people playing with 3D unless they were following the standards and unless they understood what digital data they should be developing, to what level of detail and what level of information should be attached. But for us, providing we got those 3 pieces in place, I felt that we could say that we were level 2 ready. But the real distinction is that we can't do level 2 unless our clients are also able to be at that point and to be able to communicate with us what is the data that they want to supply. And that, for me, is when we can achieve as an industry level 2 across organisations. So that has really helped, I think, certainly from an Atkins point of view, to really move into getting this change to be business as usual. But it is an ongoing process. It's certainly not one where you can start sitting on your hands and thinking, oh, it's okay, we've achieved it now. There are all sorts of distractions out there to get people to relax and go back to behaving as they used to. So continuing to have that challenge is important. So this is where that review, that learning, that progress and sustaining the energy and the inspiration is important. So a change approach, you're informing, you're inspiring people, you're integrating. And I think one of the important elements is the role of KPIs, so key performance indicators, making sure that people can identify with those, feel that those are achievable, they know what they can do about them, that you can monitor, you can intervene and challenge people if you're not getting the KPIs that have been targeted, and that you can then celebrate. And again, I would want to acknowledge Arup for releasing the BIM maturity assessment to the industry. It's been a fantastic piece of work. Certainly as Atkins, we've embraced that and are developing that and sharing that back to Arups and through into ICE BIM Action Group. And it is a very clear way of being able to demonstrate and to communicate with everyone where we're at, where we would like to be, and what the level of progress is. So I'd really like to come back, and I'm getting close to the end here now, is the energy within, how you sustain it. Why has it been so difficult to sustain progress towards collaborative working, and why I'm worried that if we don't get this right, that could affect our implementation of BIM as well. And I think there's something here about how, how it's not just extrinsic, or maybe it is for some, it's not just about profit, it's about what we truly believe we want to be achieving. And I'd like to use Crossrail's vision of intelligent infrastructure, which I think is a great powerful one, which can really galvanize the supply chain and all of the different organizations about what this truly is. So developing that central data hub is not the end of sole end. Actually, the real win is being able to integrate a fantastic service which is delivering to our customers, giving them a great user experience. It's empowering the people who are having to drive that infrastructure, from the asset technicians through to the people who are interfacing with customers, and it's making that asset intelligent, and certainly over the next 10, 20 years, not just predictive, but then responsive as well. So really embedding much better operational and maintenance capability. And I think having that shared meaning really then can help a connection between personal and organizational values and energies, which really can make this change be sustained and be successful. So I think I'd really like to leave it at that, and I'd be very happy to take questions. Andy, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Anne. One question that's come through. Obviously, BIM this change management program that you've been going through at Atkins, I mean, was this change management program based on previous sort of cultural change management programs, and what that was really, and where that was devised from?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So yes, so we've got a number of people. We've got change leaders across the different businesses. There have been a number of different change programs that have occurred within Atkins. One in particular, which is very pertinent as well, is the BS 11,000, so the collaborative working. So being able to look at the behaviours for collaborative working and being able to facilitate essentially and get to the objective of certification of BS 11,000.
No, I see. So I want to ask, who is responsible for the overall, for the model through the iteration stages, and who has ownership of the complete federated handover model?
So, well, that would depend on the particular project, if I'm understanding that correctly. So if we're talking about, it would depend on the particular role of Atkins or anyone. So you would have, within the employer's information requirement, the employer would be actually saying who the information manager was. You'd have those relationships defined across the contractor, the tiers, and who was responsible then for essentially folding up all of the different task information into the master information and the handover of the federated model. So that would be defined within the BIM execution plan, and that BIM execution plan should be developed collaboratively across the supply chain. So if I'm understanding the question right, that wasn't one that I could bat straight back. It would depend on the project and how it had been set up and what the role of your particular organisation or team was.
Okay, and then someone asked, sorry, I was going to say, looking from, I suppose, an FM perspective, thinking about cultural change, should there not be standards set that enforce that the FM team that will be operating the building when complete to be present with the design team and clients at design reviews and other relevant meetings?
That's a lovely question. Great to whoever did who raised that one. So certainly within part 3, our intention was, and it's a shame part 3 came after part 2, because that's should be looking at the OPEX side of things. We'd like to be able to make that much clearer, is that this is very much about the convergence of with asset management, and PAS 55 and 55,000 is that the facilities management team, the operation and maintenance team should absolutely be there. That's why the asset information requirements are so important, and really you would want to define those before you define a project information requirement or an employer's information requirement, because you want that project to be developing digital data, which will then enable the facilities managers to take ownership of the building or that piece of infrastructure and ensure that they can actually manage it through its whole life effectively. And that really is, I think, a missing piece at the moment. I think partly industry hasn't understood that fully yet. Partly there's a responsibility to communicate the intention better. I think there is an issue, and I didn't quite get to it actually, is the procurement side of things, is that what's holding us back at the moment is that really procurement is still driven by CapEx and OpEx rather than TOTEX, so that total expenditure. If we could do that, it would be much easier to be able to get the facilities managers to engage and the operators and the maintainers. But it is a great question, and certainly I think that that's what should be happening, is that their influence is coming before the employer's information requirement, the project information requirements have been written. And it'll be good to see that develop over the next couple of years, I hope.
someone asked us, does the BIM toolkit replace the EIR or BIM execution plans? They seem very similar. Or is it to the support? Yeah.
So the intention of the toolkit, and Rob Manning will, I don't suppose is on the call, but hopefully I get the intent of it right. The toolkit should inform the employer's information requirement and the BIM execution plan. So this is a little bit what I was talking about when I got a few people at Atkins to look at what we would view as our digital plan of work at the moment and how that would compare with the toolkit. So the toolkit is helping us convey what level of information and what level of detail is required at each stage of the project. And cascading out of that could be an employer's information requirement and could be a BIM execution plan. But it doesn't in itself replace the BIM execution plan and the employer's information requirements. But it certainly helps to put those together much more effectively.
Okay, and then if the architects were to receive a structures model, federate it, and reveal there needed to be changes made to avoid clashes, who has the overall power, say, of which discipline makes the changes, architect or structure?
So the structural team should always have ownership of their data, and that should always be auditable. So the architect should not be changing that, and that should be recorded. So following 1192, it is the structures people who would share their model appropriately when it's been checked, reviewed and authorised. The architect can take that and overlay their model with that. Ideally, if there's been the correct interdisciplinary review and they've been working collaboratively, there shouldn't be clashes, but I accept that that's not always the case. It would depend on the stage of the project, is that they wouldn't change that version of the model. If they are then saying that there is a different team who's going to take on responsibility of the structures, they would then, from that structural design, they would then take it the next stage, and it would be recorded by revisioning who owned that and who was now taking responsibility. But there's no way that you can be changing somebody else's decisions. That is already in there. It has to be respected, and it's recorded through the revisioning and through the naming of the model. So and that's very clear within the 1192.
And I guess with your ICE cap on, is there any fundamental differences when sort of managing BIM for an infrastructure project compared to a building project, or process the same?
The process is absolutely the same, and I think we're really making some progress on that. I think some of the difficulties has been on the standards. Uniclass, on IFC, on COBE, but there's a lot of work being done. Building Smart's really leaning into that. There's some good use cases come forward through Environment Agency and now with HS2 and Thames Tideway, I believe, to really make sure that is working, and we can turn the wheels to make sure that it works for infrastructure. But the process absolutely is the same across the building and infrastructure environment.
At what stage is it best to clarify who will obtain and load the model with asset information, and how does this affect costs?
Can you repeat the question again?
Yes. At what stage is it best to clarify who will obtain and load the model with asset information, and how does this affect costs?
So I suppose it depends what you're talking about the model. It sounds as though who's asking the question thinking of it as just one model, and what the asset information is. I guess I'd be saying, well, what is the purpose? So this is looking at the digital plan of work. Are we within the design construction phase here, and the asset information and when that needs to be done? So there's a real trend to over-detail within conceptual design. Again, that's for the employer and the supply chain to agree when it is appropriate for a particular project to input information about the asset. Once it's gone from a conceptual or detailed design, it's being constructed, we've got a good record of what's actually occurred when it's been constructed, and we've done that soft landings. So we're actually making sure that the whole of the team, the designers, the construction teams, are making sure that what they've actually delivered is what the employer, the owner, the asset owner has asked for, and that's a very important piece of the soft landing. So a little bit difficult, I think, in the way that the questions posed to be more specific, unless you'd like to come back to me on it. But I think probably the answer is to point you at the soft landings and to think, well, at what point do you need information, and what level of information will you need around that asset at any one point? And that will give you the answer of who should do that and at what point in time.
I mean, and in terms of the BIM change management program Atkins is going through, what have you found the sort of most challenging part of that whole process?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
In terms of the BIM change management program that you've been going through, what have you found the most sort of challenging part of that program?
I think being able to understand all of the stakeholder needs and their position, and then I think being able to sustain the momentum and the level of interest across all of the different stakeholders at any one time. So it's quite a complex thing to orchestrate. And I think one of the things has been difficult because we've been doing this in parallel with the level 2 documents being developed as well. So this had to be quite agile in responding to that, and being able to respond to different client needs and levels of understanding. So being able to draw together different regional demands and understandings has certainly been quite a complex thing to manage.
And then someone asked about off-site manufacturing. It says, does the Atkins BIM process improve efficiencies on off-site manufacturing and constructions?
It certainly can do, but you need to have that informed discussion with the guys, and I think the opportunity is still there and still to be built on to chase that down and really explore what the opportunities are. And I think, you know, some of the things about standardising product is an important piece of that.
And then he follows on, if yes, in what ways as it relates to cost and lead time for building an infrastructure?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, the sound's
yeah, sorry about that. And leading on from that question, said, if yes, in what ways as it relates to cost and lead times for the construction?
Well, I think it's the way that you approach that, and whether you've involved the supply chain and the manufacturers appropriately. And if you look on the internet at the Chinese tower, which was built, I think, in a matter of 10 days, I think you can see the implications of where that could take us. And as far as managing cost is concerned, again, I think that's a question of how well you collaborate. And how soon you're thinking about that when, as an owner, and to what extent you're doing it as a one-off, and how much you're doing it across the portfolio. And
then just as a way of wrapping things up, maybe as a takeaway, what do you think the three most important things are with regard to bringing about cultural change to an organisation with regard implemented BIM?
I'm really sorry, Andy. I heard about 1 in 3 words there.
Sorry. I was just saying, as to sort of wrap things up, just as a takeaway for the session, what did you say the 3 most important things are in terms of implementing a BIM cultural change within an organisation?
Making it believable, plausible, and achievable.
Excellent. Okay, then. Well, look, thanks very much. I think that was a really good session, and I'm sure there's been everyone stayed to the bitter end. Then, so thanks very much for your time. And as wrapping things up, as mentioned, the next BIM webinar would be with Stephen Hamill. The BIM toolkit was mentioned by Anne, and then Stephen's going to be going through the I suppose, reveal it, showcasing what can be done there. But yeah, you're getting lots of thank yous coming through, by the way, Anne, on the system. But yeah, thanks again, everyone, and I'll be in touch as more information comes through for future BIM webinars.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Anne.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.